Protect your DNA. BioPQQ can promote formation of new mitochondria. Infowarsstore.com.
We're coming up to the 1-year anniversary of the Bundy Ranch standoff, and there we saw the power of the community come together and peacefully stand down an aggressive group of invaders, federal agents from the BLM. Thank you for joining us. It's been a long time since I've talked to you, about a year, I think.
Well, thanks for inviting me, and I don't know how long it's been, but I appreciate you having me back on, and it's always exciting to talk to American people, and, you know, even around the world, I've talked to a lot of people. I get excited.
Well, it is an exciting place. And I tell you, it was one of the most exciting things I've ever been part of or witnessing, to see people stand up against violence being done to their neighbors. And that was really how we got involved with that. We were very concerned about the reports we saw coming out of the area as it started building towards that standoff on a Saturday. And I thought it was really an inspiring thing to see the neighbors come together to support you, to get your cattle back. And now we want to talk about the land issue, because now that's back in front of the people again. There's been some movement in Utah at the end of the year. There was a bill that went into effect in Utah, if I'm not mistaken. Is that correct?
Yes, Utah had a law passed in the last session, which had been 2 years ago. It's supposed to come back or be in effect on January 1 of 2015. So that date is passed.
But of course, the federal government has ignored that, like they ignore so many different things. They ignore their own constitution. So you're trying to do something in Nevada, and 2 days ago, you had a large group of people that went down to show their support of a bill that is being put forward by a state rep there. It's Michelle Fiore. Is that how you pronounce her name?
Yes, that's right.
Okay. Tell us a little bit about that bill.
Well, that bill is AB 408 is the bill number. Let me tell you a little bit about the excitement of 408. 408 went through a legislation committee and come out, without a number, and they give that bill a number, and within 4 days, it was the most popular bill in Nevada legislature.
Oh,
it
great.
had moved from 0 through 1,000 other bills to number one. So that gives you an idea of the interest that was going on here. So this is the number one bill before the legislators. Yesterday they had that hearing on AB 408, and the media was very interested in it. There was, over 10 large cameras there, representing TV stations, things like this. A lot of media there.
Yeah, we covered it, and the LA Times covered it as well. They were spinning it as hard as they could. We'll talk about that in a little bit and give you a chance to set the record straight. But yeah, go ahead. Tell us a little bit about the bill and exactly what it would propose to do.
Well, what it is it's a bill strengthening Nevada law, and the way I like to explain it is, hey, it's bringing our Constitution, the state of Nevada, back to be constitutional. Our United States Constitution only allowed the federal government to have certain powers and certain things. One of the things our Constitution allowed the federal government to have is only 10 miles square of land, and then other lands that they needed for military bases. And those lands within these states, all that land that the federal government could have had to be approved by the legislators of the state and bought from the state, and for only a certain purpose.
Yes.
And now we have the federal government coming out here and claiming they own all of the public land, they own all of the resources, they have all of the policing power. Well, that's not so. And this bill was saying, hey, Mr. Government, or Mr. United States Government, you guys have no jurisdiction authority here. So now, bye-bye.
Absolutely. We've had, Alex has talked to you several times in the last year, and we've talked to Ken Ivory from the American Lands Council, and he pointed out that they did this in eastern states. They did it in Florida, for example. It became a territory, then it became a state. They turned land back to the state. They turned it over to homesteading and various examples. And he argues, of course, that there's nothing that the federal government is doing that can't be done at the state level. and done better because it's closer to the people in terms of managing the land, in terms of keeping it available to the public, because the federal government is not doing a very good job of either of those things, making it available to the public or safeguarding it. When we look at things like the forest fires and that sort of thing, it could be done much better at the state level. And you also have the situation there that's going on in Arizona. You know, last year we were there covering it with the Cowboys, who were upset with you guys, who were upset about what the federal government was doing with Harry Reid, who is a Democrat, going to turn this over to his crony capitalist friends. Now this year, it's a Republican in Arizona who's going to turn it over to his corporate capitalist friends and taking it from the Indians. So this is going on in both directions.
Yeah, and you know, the thing of it is this land should be ruled by we the people. Isn't that what our Constitution's all about? We the people, you know, and for the people and by the people.
Yes, exactly.
And the people are not in Washington, D.C. The people are here in these sovereign states and then in these sovereign counties. And you know, we the people are the ones that are trying to make our living, and we're trying to create our businesses, and we're trying to create a tax base for our schools and you know, our county government. So we the people should be managing our resources, and,
you know,
and that's what this bill also does. Is we're talking about not only land, we're talking about the resource. What about the resource? What about water and
yes,
minerals and timber and all of these kind of resources? Should we be governed by a central government, a king in Washington, D.C., and this army of bureaucracy, bureaucrats? And not only that, are we going to be policed by their army as they come and try to police their power here at Bundy Ranch? Is
exactly
that what we're headed for?
Exactly. Even if we don't get into the abuse of power, even if we don't get into what was going on there at the Bundy Ranch just prior to the standoff where they got violent with people, as I was going to lunch today, I flipped on the radio and I listened to the BBC talking about water issues in Australia, comparing them to what's going on in California right now. The interesting thing I found, Mr. Bundy, was that they said that in Australia, the federal government there had been trying to manage water and they had done an awful job. And they took that down to the different province levels or the states, whatever they call it in the Australian system. And they said that then they got the problem solved. You can't always solve the problems at the most distant place. And that's what really surprises me, is how many people think that you can't do it unless it's done in Washington, that it's going to cost too much money if it's done locally, that it can't be managed if it's done locally, but of course it can be done in Washington. And we look at the mismanagement, I just scratch my head and saying, what are you talking about?
You know, that subject come up in the legislature hearing yesterday. Well, Nevada can't afford this.
Yeah.
Well, you know, the big government, in other words, the United States government's got to do the management. But there was a legislature that pointed out and said, well, if the federal government's doing such a good job, how come are we in $18 trillion in debt?
And that's just it.
Are we, the people, still paying that bill?
That's just it. The federal government is not paying its bills. It's passing it on to future generations, and it's living lavishly. When we were there, we were just talking about this today, the fact that they had 80 different cars, each of them with just one BLM agent as they were evacuating that area before they would release the cattle. We're standing there watching these and counting the different cars going by, all new vehicles. Just the amount of money that they spend, the way they waste money. Of course it can be done better at the local level. Certainly can't do any worse at the local level, because at the local level, you don't have the Federal Reserve, which is going to allow you to run up a huge tab. You're going to have to pay for it with taxes, or you're going to have to manage it responsibly.
Yeah. Now, at the standoff, I've got a count of 107 vehicles.
107, okay.
Going on the road.
That's
you know, the thing of it is all 107 those vehicles were armed with armed army.
Yes.
That always fascinated me.
Absolutely.
Why would the State Highway Patrol allow an army like that onto their highway, and then why would that army be able to pass through the city of Mesquite without any resistance, through the state of Arizona without any resistance, through the port of entry into Utah without any resistance, and that army disappeared in the state of Utah, and not one media, no question. That army went across the United States without one question asked.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, that's what we saw. Now, getting back to this bill, as they point out, this is a person from, as the LA Times put it, a nonpartisan think tank, but I think they were pretty partisan. They were complaining about it, saying this goes farther than the most extreme bill we've seen so far. I've seen 37 bills like it in 11 Western states, and they thought this was by far the worst. I thought it was interesting, Mr. Bundy, that they called you, the same person called you a sovereign citizen. You're not a sovereign citizen. That's a very specific label that they try to hang on people to make them dangerous to law enforcement because they profile people with that label that's put on them. You're talking about sovereign states. You're asking the sheriff and the state to take on their sovereign responsibilities, aren't you?
Well, sure. And when I say sovereign state, what I'm really saying is statehood. You
Yes,
know, I
exactly.
believe this Nevada does have a statehood status. You know, President Lincoln declared the Nevada a state.
Yes.
And when he did that, he didn't declare it a territory. He declared it a state. He took it out of the territory status. Nevada used to be the territory of Nevada of the United States. Well, that status was taken away, and that's where the federal government disposed of the land. When they made the territory a state, they disposed the territory land, and now it's a state, a sovereign state with equal representation as our original 13 states. It has a boundary around it, in other words, a state line around it, and those people in there has their sovereignty.
Yes.
And when I say sovereignty, that means that they can make the rules and regulations only restricted by the things that the federal government, the Constitution of the federal government said that would remain federal. And one of the things that said would remain federal is that 10 square miles.
Yeah. That's right.
You know,
that's right. You're talking about the 10th Amendment and how the states retain powers under the Constitution. That's the way the Constitution is written. I want to read one more.
All of the powers that wasn't delegated
That's right.
in the Constitution were retained to the state and to its people.
That's right. Absolutely. Let's talk about one more thing here that was brought up. I thought this was kind of interesting. In one of the articles, they had a 8 News reporter asked the Assemblywoman Michelle Fiore, is that how you pronounce her name?
Fiore, yes.
Fiore, yeah, who has put forward this bill. She asked her, she said, could the feds essentially say, I don't care what you have to say as a state because the bill has no teeth? How would that work? Is that of concern of yours? And Michelle said, that's what the feds have been saying. So
yeah,
now we're saying we're tired of that.
Yeah, that's true. And that's exactly what they've been saying ever since statehood.
Yes.
That was 1864. But they also, Nevada passed a Nevada Land Ownership Act in 1976, I believe. And that basically said Nevada owns its land. And, of course, the federal government has ignored that for all these years. Now, this bill here has to have teeth. And let me see if I can make a quote here. You know, a bill or a law that has no penalty has no force or value.
Yes.
And that's what's been happening to all of these land bills. They don't put a penalty on there, so there's no force or value.
Yes.
Now, what ought to be put on this, and I don't know whether it'll happen, but I know I dealt with Nye County, Nevada, with their some legislation the county did, and the bill, the work that they did said any person or entity contract with a foreign government dealing with our land, water, and resources, there will be a 5-year jail sentence and a $100,000 fine. Well, now that's got some teeth in it.
Yes, yes. And speaking of that,
you monkey with Nye County's water, or Nye County's land or resources, and you could be 5 years in jail and a $100,000 fine. Now that's got some teeth. Without that fair phrase in there, the federal government will ignore it.
yes,
And
yes.
the federal government's not the one that's going to get the penalty. It's the citizen that deals with the federal government. Make contract. Remember what I said? Make contract with dealing with our land and resources.
Now the only thing,
the guilty one.
well, that sounds like an excellent bill. But in order to bite with those teeth, you've got some teeth in that bill. But to have a bite, you've got to have somebody who's actually going to exercise the teeth. Do you have, and of course, the weak link in that is the sheriff. What's the situation there in Clark County now? Because it was the sheriff that was letting them get away with this.
Well, I'm not sure because the sheriff has never exercised any power or authority. I'll tell you one thing about the Bundy Ranch in this part of Clark County, and it's been said several times on national TV and media. It says this could be the freest place on earth.
Yes.
And what they're talking about is, hey, we don't have the federal government bothering us. And the county sheriff, he's been basically staying out of the road. We hope he would protect us, and we'd hope that he would get involved if we needed his assistance. But he hasn't been involved, and so we don't really know where he stands.
That's right. And that's the thing that I think was so important when I was there, like I said at the beginning of the interview, to see citizens stand with their neighbor against injustice, against the illegitimate use of force. That was really the original intent of this country, I think, was to have a sheriff who would exercise authority when there was something that was happening in the community that he needed help with. He would get the posse together. That was the community where the power truly resided. And that's what we saw at the Bundy Ranch. There were no shots fired, but people showed that they were determined, that they were not going to back down. And when I think every time we see this happen, the federal government will back down. We've seen this happen now in several states. We've seen them back down from bills that were going to mandate vaccines, that were going to take away our informed consent as citizens and enact a kind of medical tyranny. The people came back in massive amounts, and in North Carolina, as well as in Washington State, other places, they have withdrawn these bills. People can get their freedom back if they won't just accept the tyranny. I really thank you, Mr. Bundy, for really leading that.
Hey, I appreciate that, but let me tell you, it's very simple, and I've thought this thing over for 20, 30 years, and I've seen many of these cases you're talking about. There's no time that we, the people, or our county government, or our county sheriff, has ever said no, that the federal government overrode them and got their way.
That's right.
The county sheriff, all he had to do on this Bundy issue was say no.
Yes, that's right.
One word, no, and the Fed would not have run over him. But when we have these governments and these people that won't say no, then, boy, that just gives them the go-ahead to bring their army, do whatever they want to do.
Absolutely. And when the sheriff wouldn't say no, the community stood up and said no, and you led that effort, and you did a wonderful job. We're really thankful that that worked out in a peaceful way, and thank you so much for joining us.
Hey, thank you for asking. We still live in the best country in the world with the best Constitution. We really are blessed here in this land.
That's right. We just need to enforce it, don't we? Thank you so much, Mr. Bundy, Cliven Bundy.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Well, that's it for tonight's news. If you're watching this on YouTube, please consider subscribing to the Alex Jones channel. And if you're watching it on YouTube, please consider supporting our operation with a subscription to Prison Planet TV. Your paid subscription supports our operation, and it allows you to share it with up to 11 other people at the same time, so you all get the news the night that it happens. Well, join us again tomorrow night at 7 Central, 8 p.m. Eastern.
From the water table to our soils to the atmosphere itself, our world is becoming more and more toxic each and every day. But it's not just the air outside that's toxic. Indoor air has been shown to have 2 to 5 times higher concentrations of pollutants than even outdoor air. And most Americans spend 90% of their time inside using toxic chemicals within their homes. There are more than 42 million smokers in the United States. Well over 1,000 types of mold and mildew linked to numerous conditions. And don't forget the fact that 6 million Americans live with pets they're allergic to as well. When I began to research these statistics, it was clear to me it was time to start cleansing my lungs in order to combat the toxic environment that we cannot escape, but that we can fight back against. Made with organic and wild cultivated herbs and manufactured in the USA, the new Infowars Life Lung Cleanse is here in a convenient spray bottle that can be brought with you throughout any toxic environment. Now available exclusively at InfowarsLife.com or by calling toll-free 888-253-3139.
You are watching the Infowars Nightly News, which airs 7 p.m. Central at InfowarsNews.com. And your support is helping us defend liberty worldwide.